This is that 73 Super Bass. It's all done up. Well, almost. I've got to put the knobs on and put the screws that hold the board in place. But I just finished biasing it. 60% dissipation, 120 volts come out of the wall. The owner did not want the output impedance selector switch replaced. So we have a hardwired 16, and these are 8. That'll work with what he's got. You can use two 16 ohm cabs here. You can use a single 8 ohm cab or a single 16 ohm cab. And I'll put some labels on here after I put the knobs in place and all that fun stuff, just so he knows that these are the 8s. This is the 16, and it's non-permanent, can always be put back to how it was if he wants to have that selector switch changed out. Anyway, I've got I'm going into the treble input, and this is super bass, so it's a lot less treble than the super lead, but it's a really nice balanced clean. And I've got it set right to where it's no longer clean if you're using higher output pickups like this P90, and I'll show a humbucker in a minute. But it's really nice and clean with the Strat, that big, clean Marshall thing that no other amp really does. I've got treble middle bass set to noon, presence just below noon. And let's see, the o'clock on this volume is about 10 o'clock. I don't have the knobs on yet, so I can feel, because these have a D shaft. I only have the volume up about 10 o'clock because it's really freaking loud. It's too loud for me to turn up anymore, really, in this small space. I do have to protect my hearing. In the future, I'm going to get like a Shure reactive load box with IRs so I can use that and give you the full sound. I have briefly tested it at full volume. There's no oscillation or anything, but I just cannot do that to myself. This is already as loud as I ever need to experience in this small room, but it sounds great. So that you just heard all that response with a kind of hot P90 in this 59 Les Paul Jr. Now to Strat pickups, single coils, same settings. If you go to the bridge and hit it hard, we go to a humbucker. So from a very expensive unobtainium Les Paul Jr. to a production SG. So far, all that's been done with the treble middle bass at noon, no adjustments. I'm going to adjust the treble up a little bit, about 130, mids up about 130, bass down, 930-ish. I'm kind of feeling it. And due to the nature of this circuit, I'm going to turn the presence up about noon. So, that all sounds pretty cool. I wish my eardrums would let me do some more of it. I really do need to get that load box for such things. Let's take a look and see what all I've done. So I started with the crucial things. Both of the fuse holders were all chewed up, and a screwdriver didn't grab it. People had used the wrong size tool for too long. They just were falling apart. So 2 new high-quality fuse holders. It had a Fender-style clamp-on cable that whoever installed it didn't have the right tool for, so the chassis got all chewed up in the process. And to make it work, because they didn't have the right tool, they super glued it liberally, so I had to drill out the old one. So much fun. Before, the ground wire from the power cable, the bare strands were just wrapped beneath this nut that holds the transformer in place and tightened down. And the strands, when you do that, they'll bulge out the sides because it just squeezes them out. So the genius who'd worked on this before used super glue to hold the strands to the nut, so the whole thing got squished down. Super glue is not especially conductive, so it was a really poor ground, and all it did was make this transformer mounting point a little bit too loose, and it had, of course, loosened over the years. So, people say, why do you always shit talk other techs? Why can't you just do the work and not mention it? I think it's important to call when bad work is done and why it's bad. You cannot just tuck strands of a ground wire beneath a nut and hope for the best. Now, similarly, you see some new stainless steel hardware here. The rest of the amp I was able to keep and reuse the original brass screws, bolts. What do you call them? The machine screws. If they're larger, they'd be bolts. But the brass ones, 2 of them broke. And one of the ones which broke was this one here, where these grounds have been made. And this has just been kind of floating in place. It was held in place by corrosion. So I have a new stainless steel machine screw, stainless steel nylock nut here for these grounds, including the filter cap, and a new one added here with a good solder connection for the ground wire. And you can see the main and HT fuse holders from the other side. I just called and let the owner know that he's going to have to get some new knobs on this thing. He's picking it up tomorrow, so I don't have time to order new knobs. But I went to put these back, and some of them turn just fine, and others have a lot of resistance because the plastic itself is all warped and degraded. And 2 of them I can't even turn. These, if I put these on here, they don't turn at all. The plastic just breaks. After a long time of being held in place, the metal stays still and the plastic wants to move, and things break. And they all got cracks through them. It's easily done. They have a D shaft, so the set screw goes on the flat. There's only one way to do it. It's a pretty simple thing to do. So he's going to install some new knobs, and he can keep the old ones in a bag for any collectors who obsess about such things. The 3 switches here, polarity, power, and standby, are all now the same distance from the front panel, which is nice. The polarity switch is not used, but the power and standby are. And for the first time in the amp's life, the power is actually switching the hot, not the neutral. So the hot is fused and then goes to the power switch, and the neutral just joins this other primary here at the polarity switch. So that still has the hot and neutral connections to the polarity switch, but the wire going off to tie that to chassis through a capacitor, but that capacitor has been removed. So it is a dummy polarity switch, but it gives us a nice tie point for hot and neutral. This indicator lamp was broken, and someone has super glued this red bezel to the front so it doesn't come off, and I didn't want to deal with chiseling it away and potentially damaging the metal panel. So I have super glued the indicator light from the other side, so it's all working again, but it was not the right solution. The right solution was, rather than super glue it to this panel, put in the proper thing. The new, the super glue I put on was from the rear, just holding the little center post to the metal, and that comes right out. And once that's done, use the correct, I believe, 3/8 inch bit just to get any super glue off the inside walls of that hole, and you're back in business. But that can has been kicked on down the road. And to get these 3 switches the same distance from the front panel, I adjusted the nuts on the front panel so they're all, the switches are flush by the same amount. And then I tightened these nuts from the rear to tighten everything up. So I'm not putting any pressure on those almost cosmetic dress nuts on the front. They're all lined up at the same 45 degrees. Everything's equidistant from the front, and the tightening happened back here. You can see I've changed out all the filter caps, the big multi-section can caps, aside from using new bus wire for the grounds and new red wire to connect make the series connections here and here. I was able to use the original balance resistors on the screen, and all the connections are redone on the all this stuff for the screen and reservoir connections at the hot end that I'm not actually showing you right now are all done, though I did use bus wire to parallel these rather than using long strands of the original wire, because the spacing on FNTs is different than the original LCRs or dailies, and it just doesn't, if you try to reuse it, it gets sloppy. So just like I've done Well, you can't see it here because I used the red wire. I'll show you on the other cap over there. Just as I did here, there's a bit of, I think that's 20 gauge bus wire bridging these, and then the old wire just comes in and tucks in. So rather than have the old wire itself make this bend, you just get sloppy work when you do that. This is much easier. End result is it's 1973 again. The amp is feeling great. It's sounding great. And, tucked beneath the preamp board at the other end, you can't see, is the sixth cap in this. It takes 6 multi-section can caps. Down here at the preamp tube sockets, I was able to reuse everything. I did have to do most of these connections. Many of these connections had broken off through the years. The wire had just broken off within the solder joints. I had to change out this resistor, this 100K plate resistor. And you can see, like I showed you on the Marshall the other day, that these green grids are approaching from this side, staying away from the black heater wire going to pin 9. And that has really reduced heater noise in the background. Because the owner didn't want me to change out the original selector switch, as I mentioned, the 8 ohm tap is hardwired here from here, where the feedback is connected. So here's the actual 8 ohm secondary from the output transformer. Here's this bit of wire going over here to these 3 jacks. And this wire, which was going to the center of the switch, is now going to the 16 ohm connection. And the 4 ohm tap is not connected to anything, but that can be easily changed if his needs change in the future. But in general, that he can use 1 16 ohm cab, 2 16 ohm cabs, or 1 8 ohm cab. That's going to cover an awful lot of stuff. If he finds himself needing to use 2 8 ohm cabs, he can have a tech move the wires appropriately, or a future tech can change out this switch, disconnect this black wire, remove it, move this wire back from here to the center post, and then just replace this one strand of wire here, which I've snipped here, with a new bit of bus wire, or just bridge from here to here, and it's back to stock. This was the most effective solution at no real cost and no real complication. As the amp came in, it had a big cap here that was just mounted to ground, and that was the polarity cap. That's no longer needed, so it's been removed. It's in a bag to be returned. It had a whole bunch of burned diodes here that had toasted the board. That's all been cleaned up. New diodes installed here. Everything redone in the bias supply. The old trim pot still works. These things look horrible, but they still tend to work. It has been cleaned, though. And some new output coupling caps going back to the original correct for super bass 100 nanofarad value instead of the drifted, leaking black cat caps that were 22 nanofarad. With a very few exceptions, like here and here, I was able to retain all the original resistors. Two others down at the other end. I'll show those. So new cathode, back to a shared cathode for the super bass. So new cathode bypass cap here, and I had to change out these. These were mismatched, very cracked, wrong value Phillips mustards, I believe. Might have been a Sozo in there. Anyway, these are 2 matching Vichet MKT 1813s. They work really well. Had a replaced pyre here. Here's an original pyre. It's still there for the plate resistor on the treble input, volume 1, but for volume 2, the normal input, that had been replaced a long time ago by a very noisy, as it turns out, carbon comp. So this is a Vichet 2-watt metal film. Same with this one here. So those are the other 2 that I had to change out. This was also a carbon comp. Oh yeah, and here in the mix resistors, someone had changed these out for the incorrect values. I put them back to 470K, and then the 500 picofarad shunt cap across that. Might be a 470, I can't see from here. And in this section, there was a lot of wire that had been replaced poorly because this thing had been modded to an Earthsat super lead. And some of the original wire had broken where the wire itself, the strands, had just kind of corroded. And so there's bits of wire that are still soldered on the other side, but the wire was broken off. So as necessary, I have replaced this wire with some new top coat. I used the white here. I thought I had some brown and pink, but I was out. Better to have good connections than to worry about the colors. This stuff is solid. It sounds great. For whatever reason, the grounding on this has not created the very audible problems that this kind of ground connection often causes in Marshalls. This one has a very acceptable noise floor, in my opinion, so I have not done anything heroic. It's always a balance between, hey, what sounds the best versus collectors, because collectors are insane and they run the game. A lot of this was just cleaning, if you see the previous videos on this amp. But cleaning is an important thing. And I went on the underside of the board and got a lot of old flux and dirt off of everything and triple checked all the solder joints that are remaining. Had to redo some solder joints like this one. This one had bird's nested really badly. And what that is when you have a whole bunch of wires spread out like that, we call it bird nesting as opposed to them all being twisted together, which makes a much better connection. So this amp is overall in good shape. I cleaned all the pots and lubricated them. I'm about to put the hardware back to mount the board in place now that I'm sure that there's nothing else that needs to be done. The amp is sounding really, really good. I'm not sure if there's anything else to say. I'm kind of sad to see this one go, but unless I had a reactive load, I would rarely get to turn it on. And when I did, the neighbors would hate me because it is so damn amazingly loud. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching.